Ready to go? We hit record, so yeah, we're good to go.
Welcome everybody to the first session of the Chinook Entrepreneur Challenge. It's standing room only, I guess. Right? Thank you all for being here. My name is Jason Bacon. I'm the project coordinator for the Chinook Entrepreneur Challenge. There's a few things that we're going to go through tonight before we get to the reason that most of you are probably here, our presenter, Craig Elias. And the agenda that we're going to cover is just some really basic housekeeping things that I typically go over at the beginning of every session. Who we are, why you're here, even though probably most of you already know that. The submission deadline, which any of you that took the sessions last year, you will have that memorized in your mind, that deadline, by the third session. I will make you chant it to me like a mantra, if we have to. We're going to talk about who makes this possible, and then we're going to get to Craig Elias, who is our speaker tonight. So first off, the challenge. These are the three questions that I really want to answer. Who, what, and why. So as I said, my name's Jason. I'm the project coordinator for the challenge. I'm a business analyst with Community Futures. We also have Stuart Levac at the back there, who's our program assistant who came to us. He's actually a student at the university, a co-op student with us who's been helping us out as well. Community Futures is the organizing partner behind the Chinook Entrepreneur Challenge, but we have a lot of partners. Some of them are in the room tonight, and we're going to kind of talk about that as well. So what is the challenge? 8 weeks of training that by the end of it will give you the tools and the things necessary for you to start or build a business plan. The people that we have coming in, that is what they deal with on a daily basis, is helping entrepreneurs build business plans, and this is something that's totally free for you to take as a part of our partnerships with everybody in the region as well. In terms of how it works after the 8 weeks, we have a submission deadline, which we'll get to next. After that's put in, everybody's business plan is touched by 3 screeners, and you're scored, and those scores are given back to you with their feedback. In my mind, that is one of the most important things that you can get from the challenge. Even if you don't make it to the finals, the opportunity to get your business plan screened by 3 people who look at business plans every single day and can tell you if you're going in the right direction, if you've missed something critical, if you maybe neglected to think of something altogether, that's an opportunity for you to get that feedback that you might not normally be able to get. After that, you get to, if you make it to the finals, we have 2 streams, a general stream and a technology stream. If you make it to the finals, you get to go and give a pitch, Dragon's Den style, to our panel of judges, which is going to happen May 3rd of this year. And then that day, you're going to figure out how much you've won. This year, we have more than $60,000 in cash and in-kind prizes. Now the why. Why? It's because entrepreneurs need support. Anyone that works with entrepreneurs will tell you that they're a strange bunch. Everybody thinks that it can happen in this bubble, that I have this idea, I'm going to make this business, I don't need to involve anybody else. And that is just fundamentally wrong. There are so many specialists out there that know certain areas of the business that you as an entrepreneur aren't going to know, whether it's insurance, accounting, planning, forecasting. You aren't necessarily specialists in those areas. And to me, that's a big draw to the challenge, because you cannot do it on your own. No entrepreneur pretty well ever has. In terms of the partners that we have a few in here that I'll introduce. This training is ongoing. The plan that we're using this year for you guys to fill out was created by the partnership through RINSA that we work with. We have Renee up there, who works with Tech Connect through Economic Development Lethbridge. We have Bruce and Darren, who are business advisors through Tech Connect as well. We have a lot of, oh sorry, yeah, I totally forgot. Who is the new manager at...
our new program manager with Tech Connect and our entrepreneur programs.
And her background is in accounting as well. And that is something, every year, everybody assumes, I have pet peeves, you'll notice, when it comes to the challenge, and I'll every so often list them to you. And I have people that tell me every year, I probably won't come to the accounting session or session on legal because it's just so boring. And every single year, it is wrong. Every single year, that is our most interactive session, every single time. And there are parts of this that you're gonna go through that you may not have the opportunity to do kind of on your own. In terms of the training, this is what we have for you guys. Every Wednesday from 6:30 to 9 at the university, every week is something different. So we're gonna have a combination of tools that we can give you that help in the business planning process, and people that we're gonna put in front of you that you can ask those questions to that are kind of burning in your minds. We have some cool announcements that we're gonna have along the way as well, but this is that final training that you're gonna see. And that last night, if you make it all the way, is gonna be a pizza party provided by MNP as part of that panel. So at the very least, you get a free meal out of it, which is always a good thing. The submission deadline. Like I said, by week 3, you will be able to repeat this back to me like a mantra. March 28th at 2 p.m. That is so important if you're gonna put a business plan in. There's a month between the last session and this deadline. We are open, Community Futures as the organizing partner. We have business analysts that are here that work with some of our partners. We want to help you. Come in and talk to us. We'll give you the resources that you need. Some of them are already developed directly into that handbook as well, so that you can use them as you go through the program as well. But if your application comes in at 2:01, I cannot accept it. If it comes in, if you call me at 1:50 every year, do not call me at 1:50 and say, hey, I need some help, because I have about a dozen other people that are trying to do the same thing. So we don't mind helping you, but do not leave it till the last minute. So without further ado, I'm gonna get to our speaker, the reason that we're here tonight. I don't typically do too many in-depth introductions for our speakers, because I tend to let them speak for themselves. This is my 3rd year running the Chinook Entrepreneur Challenge. We're lucky enough to get Craig in on the 1st year, who gave, I think, it was a presentation by You Were Digital in Calgary. And I did a lot of digital training when I was in my career at the bank and everything. Has anybody sat in on all digital training? No? It is about the most boring thing in the world, except when Craig does it. I've never seen a room so enamored with someone. He has such a great style and such a great story to learn from as well. And so without any further ado, we're gonna, before I forget, I'm so sorry. We have some attendance sheets that we're gonna pass around. If everyone can sign their name as well so that we can track that, it would be much appreciated. And so now that I've stolen all of my own thunder, I'm gonna pass it over to Craig Elias. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you. How many people do we have online, do we know?
About 30 the last time I checked.
Wow, that is
We're gonna get
crazy.
to know each other.
So how many of you have been here before? So not many. Most of you are here for the first time. I'm just curious, what makes this year the year you're going to be part of the competition? Who wants to share why they're doing it this year?
I'm more ready. I knew I wasn't ready last year, but I was just interested in what it was about.
How many of you here to learn and probably don't even plan to submit? It's okay, don't be shy, you can put your hands, there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things that I love about competitions like this is it comes with something every entrepreneur needs. It's called an unmovable date. How many of you procrastinated somewhere along the way? This is a challenge entrepreneurs have, and what I love about competitions like this is, as we've heard on more than one occasion, there is a deadline. If you miss the deadline, you are done. So the reason I love these competitions, besides the fact there's money involved, is the fact that it forces people to move things forward. Now, I'm here really for one reason. There's a lot of people in this room that are very much in their comfort zone, and my job today is to push you out of your comfort zone. I'm going to have you go do things, and you're going to try them for the first time. It's going to feel like the weirdest thing, but if you want to get good at something, what do you have to do? Just keep doing it. I will tell you, the first time I started doing presentations, I gave a presentation inside my own company. I almost lost my breath and passed out. And then the next one I remember was I was at an event. It's called what was it called? It was called the Student Energy Conference. And I was there as a guest of the organizer. He was a student of mine. There's 450 people at Taos Convention Center. And they have a keynote speaker. They're supposed to start at 7 o'clock. I'm at the head table, 10 to 7. Guess what happens? The speaker doesn't show, and my student comes to me and says, I need a 25-minute speech on the power of a legacy, and I need it in 10 minutes. And I'm like, yeah, right. There's no way I can do that. and I got totally stressed out, and I went downstairs to the washroom, and I just said, I can't put together a presentation, but what I can do is I can put together a few stories, mention the word legacy either in the story or between the stories, and I can fill in 25 minutes. And then in 25 minutes, I got a standing ovation. And at that point, I developed something really interesting called confidence. So how many of you are confident about your idea? How many of you think you have a really good idea? Hands up. How many of you think your idea is freaking brilliant? Put your hands up. Okay, so my job today, in some respects, is to deflate that enthusiasm, because odds are today it might not be as good as you really think it is, but it can get that way. So what I'm going to do when I get past introducing myself is I'm going to ask for a few volunteers to come up front. You get 30 seconds to pitch your idea. You get to talk about what is the problem that you solve, who are you solving for, and why would someone want to become your customer. So how many of you are interested in volunteering? Wow. Come on, Pet. There's only one way to get good. How do you get good? Try, repetition. So I'm looking for at least 8 or 10 people to come up and actually do this. The first time you do it, you will suck. The best news is you will suck less the second time you do it. So the sooner you get the first time over with, the sooner you get to the second one. So we're going to do that. So a little bit about me. How many of you have seen me speak before? Hands up. So not that many. So most of you don't know my story. So I am, or was, for about 20 years, just a lucky sales guy. I just had this unbelievable knack of showing up in front of the right people at the right time everywhere I went. And then one day it stopped. And it stopped because the company I was working for admitted to conducting $11 billion, that's with a B, $11 billion in accounting fraud. And I was the #1 sales rep in the entire country when it happened. And this for me was something very unique because it had never happened before. And I was miffed by this. So what I did was I waited until August of that summer. I had a nice house down in Bowness in Calgary along the river, and I reflected on my 20 years of luck as a sales guy. And I figured a few things out. And what happened when WorldCom admitted to conducting all the accounting fraud, the lady I'd been engaged to for 6 years came home and said to me, if there's no security in your job, I'm not having kids. And 3 weeks later, she moved out. And this was 6 weeks before I turned 40. I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I said, if I'm going to do it, I have to do it before I'm 40. Does anybody want to guess what the average age of a first-time entrepreneur in North America is?
40.
It's pretty close. It's 43. I just learned that a little while ago.
40 in June, so.
It's 43 years old. But I decided if I was going to do it, because I was pretty sure I was going to mess it up the first time around, I want to do it again, so I got to do it before I'm 40. So I had this idea for a business. I got involved in a program called Self-Employment Learning. Who does self-employment learning down here?
Executive.
Okay. So this is a program I did in 2003. The funding was cut, and now it's back. And I went through this program. It's all about how to start your own business. Awesome program. I then launched an information exchange for salespeople in May. And then in September, I got a phone call from a friend of mine in Vancouver. His name is Dory. And he phones me up and says, Craig, there's this contest on the internet for billion-dollar business ideas. And you should enter your idea. How many of you have ever used Hotmail? Anybody ever used Hotmail? Okay, or Skype? Both of those companies got their first round of funding from a very famous venture capitalist. His name is Tim Draper. He gave Hotmail $600,000. It got turned into $660 million in less than 20 months. He gave the folks who ran Skype $20 million. Got sold to eBay for $4.5 billion less than 2 years later. So he holds this contest for billion-dollar business ideas. And the reason he holds the contest is Tim is a bit of a character. He's a people person. And he was an early blogger. And he was writing stuff. And somebody flamed him on his own blog and said, you venture capitalists are always the same. The only thing you ever do is invest in people you've already invested in. There's no way for somebody new to get started. And Tim, who has a little attitude, says, oh yeah, watch this. I'm going to have a contest open to anybody on the planet. You put 1,500 characters on a website. I will pick 10 of those ideas. They get to pitch to me over a webcam for 5 minutes. So I looked at all these ideas in this competition. And I'm like, I think my idea is better than all of these. So I submitted my 1,500 characters, and then I went around town in Calgary talking to all these experienced entrepreneurs and business people saying I was going to be in the top 10. I'm a first-time entrepreneur who has no idea what he's doing. What do you think all those people said to me? Yeah, right, never going to happen. Well, they were right. But for whatever reason, it turns out this guy named Tim Draper decided not to let 10 people into the contest. He actually let 11. And I was the 11th. And I can feel today what it was like to see that it actually happened, because at that point I was pretty convinced I was going to go win this contest. So here's what I get to do. I get to pitch my idea for 5 minutes over a webcam. Back then, not everybody had webcams, so they actually shipped you a webcam to do your presentation. And I'm told I have 5 minutes. And I created this pitch, and it didn't matter what I did. It was always 5 minutes and 8 seconds. So if I want it to be 5 minutes, what do I have to do to make it fit at 5 minutes? Just talk faster, right? It's not that hard. I can do that. Now, when it came time to pitch, the only problem was I was 30 seconds into my pitch, and this guy named Tim Draper starts asking me questions. And all I can think to myself is, shut the f up, because I've only got 5 minutes. But what had happened in 30 seconds?
He's already decided.
Sorry?
He's already decided.
He was like, I like this idea. So I got to my 5 minutes. I asked for the money. He says, here's what I need. I need you to send me a business plan. Now, did I have a business plan ready for a tier 1 venture capitalist? No way. So I phoned my friend Dory, who was living in Vancouver. I told him I needed help. He drove across the mountain, spent a week at my house. We created a business plan. We submitted it. And then the next day after I submitted it, Tim Draper's assistant phones me up and says, that's not a bad plan, but I need a pitch deck. So if you get a chance to pitch as part of the competition, you need to set up slides that's basically your business plan, but just the gist of it on slides. And they wanted a use of funds spreadsheet. So a use of funds spreadsheet says, if they gave me the $1 million, how would I spend it? What would it be worth when I'm done spending their $1 million? So I got them that on Sunday. Monday, they phoned me up and said, we need 3 references. So I quickly got 3 references. Tuesday, they phoned me up and say, here's the deal. You've got a meeting with all the partners in the firm on Thursday, 10 o'clock. Get down here. I'm a first-time entrepreneur. What do I need right now that I don't have a whole lot of? Money. So at the age of 40, I phoned my dad and said, Dad, I need to bum $1,000. I'm going down to California. I'm going to win this $1 billion idea contest. I'm going to come back with $1 million. Now, I don't know if my dad thought I was crazy or not, but the good thing is my dad loves me. He gave me the $1,000. I talked to Dory. He actually phoned Air Canada, used his air miles to get me a flight. I found my cousins in Palo Alto, not too far from Tim's office. I stayed at their place. I went to their office, and I poured my heart out. And they sent me back when I was done. And the next day, I was sitting down with a guy named Art Monk when Tim Draper himself phones me on my cell phone and says, Craig, there's one person in the firm you haven't met. You have to come back. And I'm like, I'm at the Stanford Cafe outside University of Stanford. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. It's 45 minutes to Tim's office. I'm going to be there for a while. It's at least 30 minutes from his office to the airport. I have a 12 o'clock flight home. And all I could think was I have to phone my dad again and bum another $1,000. But what happened was when I went to this room again, I'm sitting down right where you are. What's your first name?
Ross.
Sorry?
Ross.
Ross. And Tim walks in front, right up and says, Craig, here's the deal. I'm going to give you the $1 million. Now, you have to do 2 things for me. You have to move yourself and your company down to California. Now, when I got into the contest, I was single. What do you think happened before I moved to California? Yes, her name is Heather. She plays French horn for the orchestra in Calgary. If you ever go, the good-looking lady on the left that plays French horn, she is now my wife. And I convinced the minister's youngest daughter to date a guy who's going to live in a different country and try and get pregnant. And if it happens, I'll move back, and I'll let you explain it to your dad. But remember, I'm really good at sales, and that's exactly what happened. I moved to California. Anybody been down to San Francisco? Okay, driven across the bridge to Oakland? There's an island halfway in between. I lived on that island for a year. And I had the complete life of Riley. And then what happened 6 months into my being down in California was that Heather, who's now my wife, gets pregnant, and I have to go to the guy that gave me the $1 million, and I have to tell him that as much as I love his money, I love this lady more, and I promised her, and I promised myself, I am not going to be a successful entrepreneur with a ruined marriage and dysfunctional kids. And I gave it all up and I came home. While I was down in California, a lot of cool things happened. First of all, LinkedIn came out. How many people in the room are not on LinkedIn? Who's not afraid to admit it? Okay, so LinkedIn has been around since 2003. I'm user 3,956 of 500 million users. If you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, LinkedIn is going to be one of your most valuable tools. So if you don't have an account on LinkedIn, one of the things I want you to do when you go home tonight, open an account. Who's the first person you want to connect with?
You.
Yeah, I have 25,000 first-degree connections on LinkedIn. Almost guarantee you, anybody you want access to, you can probably get access to through myself. While I was in California, Dow Jones chose my company twice as one of the 50 most promising companies in all of North America. And I got tons of press. And when I came back, I started helping students become entrepreneurs. I taught entrepreneurship at U of C for a few years, but then I had a disagreement with some of the people that run the program because they wanted me to have students think like an entrepreneur. I don't want people to think like entrepreneurs. I want them to act like entrepreneurs. So this idea that I had that's won this $1 billion idea contest, when I was down in California, I met 30 plus people, all had the exact same idea. What was the difference between them and me?
They just thought it.
Timing was part of it. What else?
They just thought it.
Sorry?
They just thought it.
They just know? So what was the big difference between them and me? What did I do they didn't?
You pitched it properly.
I pitched it, but not only did I pitch it, but I actually acted on my idea. So you've all got these really good ideas. If you want to be successful, the best thing you got to do is just get started. Anybody here go to the gym on a regular basis? Anybody wish they went to the gym on a regular basis? The hardest part about going to the gym is getting your foot out the door. Once you're out, you're going. And sometimes entrepreneurship is just like that. You just got to take the first step and get started. I love to help small businesses. So Goldman Sachs runs a really cool program called 10,000 Small Businesses, only accessible in the US. I'm a growth advisor for them. GrowthX, really cool group. In fact, the founder of GrowthX is going to be in Calgary on June 8th. They take technical founders. How many of you are technically minded? Okay, he takes technically minded people and teaches them how to actually sell. I'm a mentor for them. Nudge, anybody heard of Nudge? Anybody heard of a company called Eloqua? Marketing automation? So one guy in Toronto had this idea that when people come to your website, today you've no idea who they are. They're what's called an unknown visitor. You can't phone them up to see if they have interest. I worked for a company in Vancouver called Microplex, and they hired a really expensive e-commerce consultant who said they should take the phone number off all their advertising and put their web page out instead. You think sales went up or down?
Down.
Down by 35% because people were going to the website, made an assumption what the product or service was, and never came back. So this guy named Steve had this really cool idea, which is I want to be able to track the visitors that come to my website. Has anybody ever filled in a form on a website to get access to something? So you have just been turned into what is called a known visitor. They can track you, phone you, email you, give you more content. Steve was the guy that created this company called Eloqua to be able to do that. He was the first in the marketplace. He sold his first company to Oracle for $957 million US. And what he realized is marketing is not the challenge. The challenge is sales. The challenge is building really good relationships. Because if you have a really good relationship, someone's more likely to buy from you. So I'm on their advisory board, and I think they have one of the best technologies out there. Last week, LinkedIn came out with a list of the 50 most influential B2B sales experts on LinkedIn. I ended up 15th on that list. The last time Forbes came out with a list with the most social salespeople, same thing, I was 15th on that list. And I hang out at Bow Valley College. How many of you go to Calgary on occasion? Okay, so if you ever want some help between now and when's the deadline? March what?
Yeah.
March 28th. You reach me you reach up, right? Call or text me. Come to the Good Earth Cafe that's inside City Hall, and you can have some of my time completely for free. We do a lot of stuff on campus. We don't just do stuff for students here, we do stuff all over the province. And I came up with a really cool idea based upon some of the incubators and accelerators that I've visited. Does anybody know the difference between an incubator and an accelerator? What's the difference? Anybody know?
Incubators for a business that's not up and running yet.
No. So an incubator basically helps you with your business. An accelerator actually gives you money. So more times than not, if you get into a program that's an accelerator, Arlene Dickinson's got one in Calgary. There's a bunch of them all throughout the United States. They'll give you between $50,000 and $150,000 to get somewhere usually between 7 and 10% of your company. I visit a ton of them across North America. Some of them, for me, have had a really big impact. Babson College has a really cool idea, what they call cadence. They run the same program on every day, just like this program is every, what? Wednesday night at
6:30.
and it's always in the same room. The DMZ is run out of Ryerson. There's a really cool guy there named Abdullah, and he's learned that there are these really cool people called entrepreneurs. But before people are entrepreneurs, they're very often an innovator. What's the difference between an innovator, someone who has an idea, and an entrepreneur, do you think? Sorry? Action is basically the only difference. 1871. It's in Chicago, 125,000 square feet. All these people in one place, kind of like what we can do at Tech Connect. There's more than one resource, all in one place. The other thing I think is really cool, and I'm trying to take advantage of it this summer, Runway actually has an incubator program where what they do is they take students from schools across North America and they take them as interns and put them into companies inside their incubator, which sounds a little bit like what Alberta Innovates wants to do. Now, everybody here, I'm going to argue, is on one side of this valley. You all think you have a really good idea. Who thinks their idea isn't good? So you are what I'm going to call an uninformed optimist. And you're going to get started. In about 6 months or a year from now, you're going to make it to the middle of the valley. You're going to become what is called an informed pessimist. And if you're lucky, you make it all the way to the other side. An informed optimist. What does it take to get from one side to the other, do you think?
Hard work.
Hard work. So I'm going to use P words. Okay?
Perseverance.
So what's the first thing you need? You got a really good idea.
Persistence.
If you don't have this, you don't even want to get started.
Passion.
Passion. You need to have passion. You need to be passionate about your idea. So that gets you to about, I don't know, here. And then what do you need after passion?
Perseverance.
Patience. It's happening, but it's just not happening fast enough. What's the last P? I've heard it a few times already.
Perseverance.
Perseverance. The problem is, this takes time. And on average, I would say it takes about 2 years. There's a problem with it taking 2 years. The problem is you miss an opportunity. So there's this term called transactional velocity. So let's pretend you've got an idea and you do something with it today, and let's pretend you get it right. So this is the curve of the impact or opportunity you have with your idea. The problem is it takes a while to figure things out because you think you've got a really good idea, but you haven't tested or validated your assumptions by actually talking to people who could be customers. How many of you talked to a complete stranger about your idea, not mentioned your product or service, to see if they have a problem that you could actually solve? So I see some hands around, but not a very large number. This is the secret, because if you don't do this, what happens is it takes you a while to figure it out, and let's even just say 6 months later. Now most people say, who cares about 6 months? All I miss is this little red spot underneath here. Turns out, no, you don't miss the little red spot. You miss the distance between both curves on the graph. And the data basically says that a product or a service that is 6 months late to market loses 1/3 of all the profit it ever would have generated. So for me, the secret to when you start a business is make sure people actually want what you have. There are 3 things I think you need to be successful as an entrepreneur. You need to prove 3 things. First of all, you want to prove that people actually want what you have. Is it desirable? The second thing you got to figure out, can you even make it or deliver it? So is it feasible? And the third thing is, can you actually make money at it? Is it viable? There's lots of really good ideas that people can deliver on, but people just can't make money at it. So I want to give you just some examples of the value of having a network on LinkedIn and this whole thing called transactional velocity. A couple of summers ago, I had this crazy idea of having a 5-day innovation event, and to hold it during the Calgary Stampede, I was going to call it an innovation rodeo. And I had this idea 3 weeks before the Calgary Stampede. And I wanted to have a 5-day event. We got 3 weeks. What's the first thing I'm going to do if I want to make this idea actually happen? So I found a space. So I found some sponsors. So see the girl with the black hair? Here? She was my space person. Richard was my first batch of money. This is Jill Cross. She's the great-granddaughter of A.E. Cross. Anybody know the name A.E. Cross? He was one of the 4 guys that first bankrolled the Calgary Stampede. These were my first people that I talked to about the idea. I knew most of them were going to introduce to them. They said, great idea, I'll give you money, let's go. Next I needed speakers, then I needed panelists, then I needed judges. I ended up with 4 keynote speakers, 22 panelists, 150 people, 2.5 million impressions on Twitter for something that was an idea, and got it done in 3 weeks. How did I get it done so fast?
Network.
Just my network. It was just, that's all it was. Now the funny thing happens when you start something, it has a habit of continuing. What's the best way to grow your business?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth outperforms everything. So all of a sudden someone heard what we were doing with the Innovation Rodeo. They're like, we have a really good idea. Can you do this for students across the province? Can you do it in time for Canada's 150th birthday? So I had this crazy idea for a program called 150 Startups. Work with every post-secondary school in the province to have more students become entrepreneurs. We give away $10,000 to some students who go through the steps of actually starting a business. Schools pick their most promising one. We run them through a lean startup. Some challenges, we actually pay them if they get things done on time. We run a pitch competition, give away $30,000, and then we send them back on campus. When I had this idea, I told somebody who said, you should talk to the person at RBC. I went to go see the folks at RBC. I went for advice. What do you think I got? Money. I got $50,000. I was like, wow, that wasn't hard. So I went to a foundation in Montreal, right? Met a guy a few weeks beforehand asking for what? Advice. Guess what I got? $25,000. I went to another family in Calgary. I went to them asking for advice. Got another $10,000. So all of this because I had existing relationships and people introduced me and I had this credibility, this transactional velocity totally took over. And one of the reasons that I love to help students is the data says a business started by somebody in their 20s. Anybody here in their 20s? Okay, so the data says a business you start will grow faster than somebody who starts when they're in their 40s. So if we can find a way to have more students become entrepreneurs, we have a big impact. And then as a result of having done that, the province came to the college and said, we're going to have this big conference. So June 6th to 8th, the province is bringing together a bunch of very successful people and very high-profile keynote speakers for an event called Inventures, June 6th to 8th in Calgary. And they came to us and said, can you run the student component? If it hadn't have been for that first thing, the Innovation Rodeo, there's no way we'd be doing this today. So for me, a lot of this is all about getting stuff done faster. That's the name of the game. Innovation is based upon iteration. How fast can you prove that your idea is stupid and pivot to something that's actually better? So here's what I'm hoping everybody in the room has got, that everybody or most of you bring a pen and a piece of paper. Okay? So who in the room is right-handed? Okay, I want you to put the pen in your left hand. Who in the room is left-handed? You know what's coming, right? Put the pen in your right hand. Here's what I want everybody to do. I want you to write out cursive script, not printing. I want you to write out your full first name and your full last name with your wrong hand. Who needs some paper? Anybody need some paper? Has anybody got a piece they can lend this guy over here? Need a pen to go with it? So, write out your full first name, full last name, wrong hand. Right, cursive, script, no printing. When you're done, you can put your hand up. Some of you have long names. Crappy pens, okay, that happens too. So, how did it feel to have to write your name with your wrong hand? Awkward. Awkward, right? Sorry? Yeah. So, it also takes a lot of thought and it takes a lot of concentration. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the pen, put it back in the hand you normally use, and I want you to repeat the process. Full first name, full last name with your regular hand, and when you're done, you can put your hand up. How did it feel the second time around? Easy, natural, second nature, takes no thought or concentration. How did it get from the way it was when you're in grade 2 or 3 to the way it is today?
Practice.
Practice. Who thinks the word is practice? Put your hand up. Don't be shy. All the way up. Okay, here's what I'm going to tell you. You are all wrong. It is not practice. It is repetition. Now, some of you are thinking, what's the difference? Practice is something you do in a safe environment at home where if you make a mistake, nobody knows. Repetition is something you do in the real world, and that's how you learn. So, when you go to apply some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, the first time you go to do it, what's it going to feel like? Awkward, uncomfortable, takes a lot of thought and a lot of concentration. If you want to get good at it, all you have to do is what? Repeat the process, repeat the process, repeat the process. Now, my assumption is that everybody in the room is in the early stages of their idea. They've just come up with something. They don't have customers. Does anybody have customers yet? Wow, okay. That's it. So put those hands back up just so I can get a sense. So probably 20%, maybe 15%. Okay. How did you get your first customers? Networking, okay?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth? But that's how you get you might get your second batch of customers from word of mouth. How did you get your first customers?
He was my boss and then he became my client.
Wow, okay. Anybody else? Who's your first customer?
We opened the doors and they walked in.
Wow, okay. So more times than not, your early customers are people who are friends or family, or sometimes called fools. Then people begin to hear about you. So most of what I'm going to talk about is really designed for those that are in the early stages. Doesn't mean because you have revenue that you're right. It just means you might have gotten lucky a few times. One of the things I find really interesting is there are some people who are what I'm going to call completely uncoachable. They're so convinced they're right that they won't listen to any advice that anybody gives them. If people give you advice and you don't agree with their advice, the best thing I can suggest is ask them a question. And the question is, what makes you say that? They've got a perspective you can probably learn from. And I don't care whether it's Brett Wilson or Arlene Dickinson or the guy next door or the gal who lives across the road. They've all got a perspective. Now, are they right? Probably not. Whose perspective is most important?
Your own.
Sorry?
Your own.
No. Potential customers. So one of the things you have to do when you have an idea, you've got to figure out that people actually have the problem that you can solve. And do they even want to buy your product or service? So here's I'm going to ask for some volunteers. I think several people said they would come up and do this. Who wants to be my first volunteer? Okay, let's find somebody else, because I'll come to you. I need, come on up. Here's what I want you to do. Tell people your name, what's the problem that you solve, who is your customer, and why do they want what you have? But you have to come up here. Because if you're going to learn to pitch, so first name is?
Erica.
Erica, okay. And what's the problem you solve?
People are working and they have children and they need
Talk to them, not me.
People have children and mom's working and they need someone who takes care of the kids.
Okay, remember, talk to them, not me. So what's the problem?
They need someone who take care of their kids while they're working.
Well, why can't the kids just be at home alone?
That's not fair for the kids. They need someone that really, really take care of them. They can be alone.
What's the problem she solves?
Time.
It's a really good question, because the dilemma is, so far, I haven't heard what the problem really is.
It's a legal
Legalities.
Well, it depends how old your kids are. My son's 12. So you know what's really interesting? At the age of 12, my son started babysitting. He would go babysit other kids and be totally on his own. But would I leave him at home at my house alone? No. That makes no sense. So there's a problem. Maybe it's a legal problem. Don't know. So who's your ideal customer?
Mothers and families that are working.
Okay, talk to them, not me. That's okay. So just anybody.
Yeah.
Okay? And then what's the value of being a customer? What do they get out of being a customer?
Well, I am a teacher, early childhood educator, plus I am a physical educator as well, PE teacher.
Okay.
And I would like to have the children involved in sports while I'm taking care of them, because I see that kids are always, or now more than before, just watching TV or just sitting in
That's
a
the
computer.
problem that you solve. How many of you have kids? How many of you hate how much time they spend on screens? The problem you have, the problem you solve is have kids spend less time on screens.
Right.
Hey, I know in my family we have very strict rules. It's still something that that's the problem that you solve.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go. Who else wanted to volunteer? I will get to you eventually. Who else? Okay, come up front. Name, problem, customer, value.
Okay, my name's Ross Wirt, and my company, we solve reliability issues for mining equipment.
Okay.
So we have different products and different innovations that we use, as well as networking. So we use our reputation and all the different mines we visit to come up with other ideas. We engage our customers to find out what sort of solutions they're applying for their equipment that might work on similar equipment in other mines, and we share that information and those products and help bring those solutions.
And the customer is?
Customers, mining companies.
So any mining company, any size, any industry, any geography.
Yes.
Okay, wrong, but we'll get to the reason why not. And the value of being a customer is what?
The value of being our customer
Yeah.
is that you're benefiting from a lot of the experience directly from the manufacturers of the products, who work directly with us and support us in all of the solutions we implement.
Okay, so I'm gonna get two more. I'll come to you next. You wanna come next?
Oh, sure.
And then you wanna come up and you'll be last? Okay, so come up while you can. So, name, problem, customer, value.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Rosemary Nyberg. My problem that I solve is HR needs for family businesses in Alberta. My customers are family-owned and operated businesses, and the value that I provide is they outsource their HR needs to me, and it started as a sole proprietorship in July. It's becoming a corporation in the next few months, and my sister Rachel is joining, and it'll be a family business for family businesses.
So, does anybody know what the problem is she solves?
Okay, I'll define that.
No. We're gonna figure this out, but yeah. And what's the value of being a customer?
I save them time and resources.
Maybe we'll come back to that. So last one. I'm gonna pick on everybody a little bit, hopefully today. So go back and have a seat.
You go ahead and pick
Okay.
on me, Craig.
Go. You're up.
Yeah, I just want.
Okay. Name, problem you solve, who's the customer, and what's the value? In the middle.
My name is Rufa Doria. We have a company named Doria & Doria Canada Immigration Consulting Incorporation.
Did I ask you to tell me your company name?
Oh, sorry.
No!
Okay, the problem we are solving is helping the people who wants to come over to Canada to navigate the system, the Canada immigration system, for them to have a little bit of ease and confidence that their processing will be on the right direction. That will be on solving their problem in the right direction. The value there,
Who's the customer?
the customers are those who wants to come here in Canada,
Okay.
to want to stay here in Canada, either to study, to work, to visit, or to bring their family over. What's the other thing? The value, the customer value. The customer value is that they are assured that being a regulated licensed immigration consultant, I am aware of the legalities on how to process the paperwork.
So does anybody get what's the value of being a customer?
Time, short.
Yeah, so you come to Canada faster. So this is one of the biggest problems all of us have. We can't describe the problem we solve. We're so busy falling in love with our solution, we feel compelled to tell people what it is that we actually have, not the problem that we actually solve. And the other thing is, we look at this. We just look at this entire market. Any mining company, any small business, anybody who wants to come to this country. The problem is that not everybody has a problem you can actually address. And even if you could address them, how are you going to reach those customers?
Okay, so we have a marketing strategy in place. We have a website. We have all those materials that we prepared, like our business cards. However, the best one is the word of mouth. It started when we helped our friend. Then our friend referred to another friend that, oh, you have the same problem as mine, and then you have to go to this immigration consulting people because they helped me. Then there was a ripple effect of that.
So is word of mouth scalable?
Word of mouth scalable?
Can you build a business and find a way to create more word of mouth and capture more word of mouth? Well, so really good question. So there's a guy named Jonah Berger wrote a book called Contagious. Anybody seen the book Contagious? Awesome book. It's got an orange cover. Okay. He talks about word of mouth, and everybody thinks social media is the key to word of mouth. What percentage of word of mouth do you think actually happens on social media? Very little. 7% is what the research says.
Unless you're in China.
Unless maybe you're in China. The problem is we got to focus on a much more motivated portion of the marketplace. There are some people in the marketplace that are motivated. You can have a seat. So for me, this is one of the things we have to figure out is who is our target market? So we got to solve a problem for a person. Because when you're trying to solve the problem for everybody, there's no way you can reach them or understand their problem enough to explain the value of actually being your customer. So you need to figure out who is your ideal clients. The second thing is when you talk to somebody, you can't tell them what you sell. You're like, how does that work? You don't tell them what you sell. You tell them how you can make their lives better. So the problem might be, if it's a case where I'm a mom, And in my neighborhood, there are lots of moms that stay home for the first few years, but now their kids are going to school, but they can't get a full-time job because they have to be home earlier. So you might say you help moms go back to work faster after staying home to look after their kids. That's the value of being your customer. That's the outcome people get. If I have someone who writes better job descriptions, the value is I'm going to have better employees who stay longer and make a bigger contribution. So for me, a lot of this comes from what I've learned from a guy named Ash Mora. Anybody heard of Ash Mora? Right? You've heard of Business Model Canvas and all the rest of the stuff. He does what's called lean startup. And he says that the biggest problem we all have is we fall in love with our own idea. It's called innovator's bias. We think our idea is so good, we can't understand why somebody won't become our customer. It is a massive problem. I only wish I knew when I started my first company what I know now about going out and validating a business idea. So whether it's lean startup or something along those lines, the whole idea is you have to focus on two things. What is the problem that you solve? And who is the customer? Not who could become a customer, but who's most motivated to become a customer. So if you sold all natural cleaning products so kids were less likely to get sick, right? The question is, who's your target market? Paranoid parents. But here's the question. If you're a paranoid parent and you already have a 5-year-old and they didn't die from the first child that happened, what do you think is the likelihood it's going to happen the second time?
That's a Carsey argument.
Could be a Carsey, but here's what happens. First-time moms are the ones that you want to go after. And if they use you for their first child, what's going to happen with their second child? They're going to use you again. So you need to figure out who is most likely to become your customer. There's one target group that is way more motivated. But we're so focused on our solution, we can't think about who's the person who's most likely to buy it. So Ash came out with this methodology, which I completely agree with. He talks about there's something that would take somebody who was not interested in your product or service, and it triggers them to have interest. So let me see if I can get this to work. It's over here. Right? This is the first thing. Something takes somebody who is happy with what they have and makes them unhappy. You need to focus on what is that event. He then took this whole model and improved it just a little while ago. It's called the Customer Canvas. This is version 2. And what I want to focus on is a few key things that I think will help you. So if you just go look up, how many of you are online? Go look up Customer Canvas, Ash Mora, M-A-U-R-A. It's available as a PDF. This is version 2. You can find it online. And I'll make sure that we get a copy you can send off to everybody. And I'll also make sure that I give everybody a copy of my slides. So I'll get you my slides as well. So this was actually one of the first things I figured out when I had this crazy idea way back in 2003. What I realized is that people change buying behaviors because they have an event. Something causes somebody to actually change. So people start out on this buying mode of what is called status quo. They are happy with what they have. They see no reason to change. You could talk to these people. You could show them your product. You could even give it away for free. They wouldn't care. And then one day what happens is they have an event. And all of a sudden now they're motivated. They want your product or service. They're in what is called a window of dissatisfaction. Unhappy, thinking of changing, but haven't done anything about it yet. These are the people you have to get to. So word of mouth doesn't work because now you've got to find a way to be proactive reaching these people instead of waiting for them to come to you. And then what happens very often is people have a second event. Now all of a sudden they can afford to change and they start the process of searching for alternatives. They're now going to the internet. Now your website might be handy. But the problem is they've already decided what is the problem and what does the solution look like. And we'll talk about something called an initial consideration set. Because if you're not there in the early stage of the buying process, you don't have what people actually want. Now, I just want to give you a personal example. So I'm just going to grab something out of my bag. Hold on. I must have taken it out. When iPhones first came out, I found it on eBay, $660. I wanted that phone. Now, when iPhones first came out, the problem was they only worked in the United States on one network. And then I found some software so I could actually hack into that phone. And I could make it work on a GSM network. So it turns out I'm a Fido customer. Fido's on GSM. So I want this phone. I have more than $660 in my bank accounts. I can make the phone work in Canada. But when I first wanted to buy the phone, I couldn't buy it right away. Why not? You want to guess why I couldn't buy that phone when I wanted it?
Demand was,
Sorry?
there wasn't enough.
There's enough. I could buy it and have it shipped to my house. It would take 3 days to get there. Sorry?
Didn't have the money.
I had the money. More than enough in my bank account.
So you couldn't justify it to your wife.
I couldn't justify it to my wife. My wife is Scottish. We don't throw anything away. And all I remember is my wife saying to me, "That's really nice, dear. What are you going to do with your old phone?" About 3 months later, my son, who's 2.5 years old, found my wife's really nice Motorola flip phone. What do you think happened? He broke it in half. I went to my wife and said, "Here, dear, you can have my really nice Sony Ericsson phone. I'm going to go buy the iPhone." So it turns out that people have to go through these different events in order for them to actually buy from you. Something has to trigger dissatisfaction. Let me give you an example. What is the one event that triggers more people to buy life insurance than all of the other events combined? Not a death in the family. The second you pee in a stick and there's a little blue stripe, what do? You give up your house next to Peter's Drive-In, you move to a really nice neighborhood. You get life insurance, you get a will, you give up your Mazda sports car, you buy a Subaru station wagon. All of that based upon a single event. What's the event that's going to make someone more motivated to be your customer? Let me give you a different example. Married man, going bald. Every day wake up older, heavier, grayer, balder, but they don't go and buy Rogaine until they have a very specific event. And you know what Rogaine is? Makes your hair grow back. What's an event that makes a married man go buy Rogaine? He gets a divorce. Or a girlfriend, yes, okay? But this is what happens. So what does the guy do? He says, "Oh, I'm back in the market. I better go grow my hair back. I'm going to go to the drugstore." Before he gets to the drugstore, he goes by a gym. And he signs up for a membership. He leaves the gym. He's on his way to the drugstore. He stops by a men's shop. What does he buy? New clothes. He goes to the drugstore, buys the Rogaine, leaves the drugstore. But between the drugstore and his house, what is there? An Audi dealership. He buys himself a brand new Audi. All of that based upon an event. In every single industry, in every single geography, there are events that trigger people to become your customer. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take 2 minutes. I want you to pair up with the person who you didn't come with. Did you guys come together? So you got to pair up with somebody else. I want you to see if you can help the other person. Help the other person try and figure out what's the event that would make someone more motivated to become a customer. Okay? Take 2 minutes, find a partner, help the other person. Okay, go. Go find somebody who gets done with. So, what would trigger someone of interest in your product or service? Would you like yes? But the whole idea is you can't do it for yourself because it's way too hard. The other person can very often do it for you really easily, and you can do the same for them. Okay? So, we got 3 ideas. time. Okay, who came up with something that triggered interest for somebody else's product or service? Who came up with something? You think? That's okay. What do you think it is? So what's his product or service?
It was to kind of like flip houses for like people who want to get out of their houses but maybe can't afford to and whatnot.
Okay.
So like family events are usually why people like to move or upgrade their house or jobs, like relocating, things like that.
So I get promoted. Sometimes that happens.
Life events, like
So
having a kid,
I totally like getting divorced, having a kid, or your kids move out of the house.
downsizing.
Downsizing happens all the time. Who else came up with something that would all of a sudden make people interested? What did you come up with?
Well, both of us are similar just on different aspects.
Okay.
So whether there's a death or a birth of a child or, again, life events
Life events
that are around.
happens all the time. How many of you sell to businesses instead of consumers? Who's selling B2B? Hands up, don't be shy. Okay? Same thing happens in the world of business to business. What do you think is the number one event that has businesses start buying from a different vendor? Sorry? Which,
Income, like, well.
not changing. So I'm the VP of sales at IBM. I'm buying from, what's your first name? Don. And all of a sudden something happens to me. And I'm going to buy from, I forgot your first name again. Ross.
Relationship.
What's
Boss
the
dissatisfaction.
So?
Your boss chews you out.
That's entirely possible, right? But my old boss I've had a really good relationship with for a long time. What would all of a sudden make a boss chew me out?
The economy.
You got a
new pricing.
who said I got a new boss? I get a new boss. A change in decision makers inside a corporation causes 32% of businesses to then change vendors. 28% of the time is a change in salespeople. So it's the relationship that matters. And once the relationship gets severed, companies change 6 times out of 10. And it's all based upon that single event of somebody changing jobs. Now, if I had more time, what I would have all of you do is look back at the things you've actually bought on your own. When you bought a new car, got a will, went for vacation, right, bought a new house, all of this stuff was triggered by something. And if you look back at some of your own purchases, you can see the things that actually triggered you. I knew a lady once, in fact, I knew a guy once who all of a sudden decided to take up the sport of Olympic rowing. Why is that? Why would he start taking up Olympic rowing all of a sudden?
You watch the Olympics.
So maybe watch the Olympics?
He met a woman he liked who was
Her name was Debbie. Okay? And then I met a lady once who all of a sudden she started mountain biking. She was a roadie, hardcore road rider in Vancouver. All of a sudden started mountain biking. Why would she start mountain biking? She started dating a guy who was a mountain biker. That's exactly what happens. So there's always these events behind the scenes that trigger people to have interest. So see if you can figure out what that is. The next piece I want to talk about is what is called an initial consideration set. So in 2002, I thought I was smart because I created this whole thing around events. Turns out that I was right for the most part, but the one thing that I didn't realize, which McKinsey has figured out, is that when people have an event, they create what's called an initial consideration set. How do I want to solve this problem? The interesting thing is that most people in this room probably think they have no competition. The truth of the matter is you always do. And it's a different way to solve the problem. McKinsey's done this research, figured out the exact same thing that I have. They have this loyalty loop, that's the status quo. People have a trigger that creates interest in doing something different. And at that moment, they start creating what is called an initial consideration set. Later on, my experience is people aren't going to start looking for different things unless they have more money or more time. And then at some point, they can finally decide. But an initial consideration set, most people think they have no competition. I'll give you an example. Jewelry. Who buys more jewelry, men or women? Men. Who do men buy jewelry for? Women. When do they buy jewelry? When they're in trouble, when they do something stupid, right? Mother's Day, anniversary, Christmas, Easter, Valentine's, anniversaries, all of these different times. If you own a jewelry store, what do you compete against? Other jewelry stores, who says that? Okay, so you're wrong. Whoa, here we go. Flowers. What else? Chocolate.
Shoes and purses.
Oh, I hadn't heard shoes before. Okay, chocolate, perfume, lingerie, purses, cars, trips. What do men make for dinner on special occasions?
Steak.
Reservations. So the important thing to realize is you always have competition. This is what people decide is how they're going to solve the problem. I've decided, right, that instead of this, I'm going to do something else. When my wife and I were coming up for a 10-year anniversary, I took my wife to a place called San Sebastian, Spain. Anybody ever been to San Sebastian? It is the food mecca of the planet. Right? It's just a few kilometers south of the French border on the ocean side of Spain. There are more Michelin-rated restaurants in San Sebastian, Spain than anywhere else on the planet except for Tokyo. My wife and I are foodies, so I decided 10 days of Michelin restaurants. That was the second it was a long time before our anniversary that I decided that's how I was going to do that. Way before I made that purchase. And most of us decide what we're going to buy long before we actually buy it. But you need to figure out what is your competition. What else are people using to solve the exact same problem? There is a guy, his name is Michael Porter, very famous economist. Anybody heard of what's called the 5 forces, Porter's 5 forces? Okay, do you remember them? Do you remember any of them? That's okay. So just like when your wife asks, do I look fine on these pants, and you take the long to answer, the answer is no, right? So, suppliers, buyers, competitors, new entrants, but the most important thing is substitutes. How else can people solve this problem? So when you're going to the marketplace, you need to think, what's another way that somebody could solve the same problem that you solve? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go find a different partner than the one you just had. I want you to pair up again. And I want you to help the other person figure out what are the substitutes for their product or service. This one might take a little longer, so let's say we'll give you 5 minutes in total, 2.5 minutes each. Try and figure out what are the substitutes for what the other person has. Go find a different partner. Go.
What's your business? Yes. So we can start with that. And then, so I'm doing just Spencer. Yes, like we can do things. So what's again? Yes. So we end up yes, okay. So obviously, like somebody's going to be doing and Facebook. Yeah, I'll do that. Like I'm doing and then just by night before, I was supposed to go all sweating in the dark. I was like, I guess it's experience, totally different experience because you're in the dark and because you're in not music. And everything is choreographed, so it's like dancing on the bike instead of just riding the bike. You like move to the music and do fun things. Yeah. And then are you going to do it online or just somewhere on your computer with the slides? Yeah. So that's how else they can do it. Trying to navigate something. So you make a place that's a good idea. Especially like now people are getting more nervous. People want to have purpose houses and everything. So yeah. A little bit. Like I'm at the point where I'm trying to get money from the bank. It's
kind of like
where would you like to do that? Would you like to lunch? Like for lunch? Where? No, staff there all the time? Like somebody there or somebody? And then you do like through the bank and probably church and send the money back.
If only one of you is not now, it's time to switch. Make sure you switch.
Hopefully it's just leverage. It's kind of leverages. I got the idea of trying to like make a break Calgary and then connecting it somewhere.
Yeah, we're waiting here
So
for my
it's
friends. Just gonna get some serious in the back.
Yeah, I see. That could be producing. Yes. Yeah, I met Jason before, like a few months ago, to try. They're really helpful. Yes. So, good information. And they're not offering that. And they have a good idea. Oh yeah, like their ICI strategy.
Hey, if you can hear me now, clap once. If you can hear me now, clap twice. If you can hear me now, clap 3 times. So who's got an example of what they came up with the other person as a substitute for the other person's product or service? What did you come up with? Anybody come up with something?
We came up with one.
What did you come up with?
Well, I don't know how confidential it is, so I'll just speak
Okay.
in general terms. But
Okay.
it's an ag product that changes the way that changes the efficiency on how the tooling works on cutting hay.
Okay. And the competition is?
Competition is traditional products.
Okay. And another way to solve the problem would be?
Well, I think there's a increasing outsourcing of what do they call it? Custom combining.
Okay.
The traditional product, which is a lower price point, but doesn't last as long. So.
Who else has something they come up with a substitute? Anybody? What did you come up with?
For her product.
So her product is a?
Personalized gym going to your own home or business.
Okay.
So alternatives would be doing it on your own, doing it on something you downloaded, going to the gym.
So I have an opinion. So this self-employment learning program that I talked about that I went through, I actually taught at that program for 10 years. And I had a personal trainer come to me. And I told him that if I worked at a gym, I could tell within 10 seconds of someone walking in the door whether or not they were going to lose the weight they wanted or meet their exercise goals. And he's like, there's no way you can do that. And I'm like, you know the way I can tell? If they come in with somebody else. Just that simple act of having a workout buddy actually makes a difference. So maybe part of your competition is a lady or guy across the road or next door who they're going to the gym with. Now, I want to share with you a story about a couple of students on campus. This is a guy named Luke. Luke has ADHD. He struggles to concentrate, and he just needs to burn off energy, and the way he burns off energy is skateboarding. He goes to a skateboard park. What's the problem with a skateboard park 6 months of the year? Closed. You can't use it. So he came up with this really ingenious idea of taking this piece of metal tube, wrapping cork around it, and he realized he could do all his stunts simply on this tube. Isn't that cool? So he was in our pitch competition last year, and when I gave him the challenge to come up with this competition, here's what he came up with. What I realized was there's retail boards that you can buy but don't do the same thing. They're $150. He also realized in the winter, instead of going skateboarding, what do people do? They go snowboarding. And he also realized that a lot of people get their skateboarding fix by playing video games. Those are his substitutes. This is Marshall. Marshall, for me, is a really interesting story. He came from Cameroon. He'd been in Canada for 9 months when he got into our business idea competition. He has English as a second language. He wasn't very good at it. And what really amazed me, and I didn't get a chance to see him present because I was managing all the contestants, but I saw the videotape of him afterwards, and he looked like he was an Anthony Robbins protege when he did this. And he had this whole thing, be cool, eat black, was what he had as his pitch. But what he did when he did his competitive analysis, he realized these were the substitutes for what he had. And he created this chart to be able to show people why he's better than the competition. You don't have to explain it, you just look at it. Now, he's got green. Green is good, right? Red is bad. He's got this yellow in this chart. If this was me, I would have made it orange. But guess what the colors of the Cameroonian flag are? Green, yellow, and red. And he managed to maintain his brand while he did this. This, for me, is one of the really important things. You need to understand, what do you really compete against? So I'm a big fan of having a grid that looks a lot like this. Try to figure out what are the factors that the audience cares about, or your target market. Does it have to be cheap, fast, good, reliable? And then compare yourself against your direct competitors, but also all your competition. You need to think of at least 2 different substitutes for what it is that you actually sell. Outside of what I do for the college and related to entrepreneurship, I'm a sales trainer. What do I compete against? What could people do or buy instead of hire a sales trainer? Sorry? Read a book? Yeah, I don't disagree. Okay? Google, maybe they might get a business coach. They might join a CEO group, often called TEC or EO. Those are my competition. So I don't try and compete against other sales trainers because most sales trainers will tell you the same thing. I'll help more of your reps make quota. But if I'm competing against a business coach, he can't say that, because that's not what he focuses on. So this is part of what comes from a book called Blue Ocean Strategies. Anybody heard of Blue Ocean Strategies? There's a Harvard Business Review article that is really simple to read around Blue Ocean Strategies. One of the best Harvard Business Review articles I have ever read. And my complete bastardization of the entire thing is competitors. When you go toe-to-toe with a competitor, they call that a bloody red ocean. If you own a jewelry store, what are you going to say to your potential customers? I'm better, I'm faster, I'm cheaper. What does the competitor say? I'm better, I'm faster, I'm cheaper. But if you focus on what they call the blue ocean, where there is no competition, it's easier to differentiate yourself from somebody else. Let me give you a different example. Southwest Airlines. So WestJet is basically a Canadian knockoff of Southwest Airlines. Anyone know how Southwest got started? Started in Texas. 3 cities in Texas: Houston, Dallas, Austin, all about a 3 hours drive apart. And they were just doing flights between those 3 cities. When they started, what were they competing against? Cars, people that drove. I could take a billboard halfway between Austin and Houston and say, if you'd flown Southwest, you'd be there already. Right? So the whole idea here is you want to focus on your competition, not just competitors. What Ash then talks about next, which I completely agree with, is what are the things that make it easier for somebody to become a customer? What are the driving forces? And what are the restraining forces? And I first learned about this by a guy named Kurt Lewin. It's called force field analysis. And this is an example of some of the reasons somebody would want to become your customer. And we do this. We say, here are the reasons you want to be our customer. And we keep pushing all these reasons, these forces for change. What we don't realize is that what's pushing back against that is all these restraining forces, all the reasons that people aren't becoming your customer. And most of us say, hey, if I want to convince someone to become a customer, all I have to do is have more driving forces, push them harder, make it happen. But it turns out that's not the best way to make it work. So let's pretend that these driving forces, if you added them all up, they total 20. So if someone's in this status quo or equilibrium, it tells you that the restraining forces must be the exact same amount, right? Now, if you wanted to facilitate change, let's pretend you could do one of 2 things. You could either add 5 to here or take 5 away from there. Who would want to add 5 more driving forces to get customers to change? Put your hands up. Wow, not many. Who would want to take away? What makes you say that's the better way to do this?
Because then there's less reasons for them to say no.
That gives them the dissatisfaction that we're looking for so that we can put our product forward.
Could be. Why else is that a really good reason?
Because restraining forces are more stronger.
They're actually not, but here's the reason. And I'm just going to use math. So let's say I add 5 to this side. I have 25 over 20. What does that equal? We'll put 2.5. If I took 5 away, I would have 20 over 15. What does that equal? So you're far better to understand what are the things that prevent people from becoming your customers than you were to try and figure out more reasons that they should become your customer. And this is another piece that Ash talks about. I love this quote by Julian Gordon. How far will the right answers to the wrong questions get you? Now, all of this information, what's the best way to get this information that we're after? What's the best way to get it?
Customer direct.
Sorry? Talk to potential customers directly. The problem is, if you wanted to go see if people might have interest in your product or service, how many of you have actually sent out a survey and asked people to fill in the survey? Anybody tried that? So who did you get to fill it in?
I started with friends.
Okay, our friends going to be your customers.
They have other friends that have kids and are asking them to send a survey.
So the problem I think you have is the fact that that's not your target market. You need to go to people who don't know you. Right? Who else tried a survey? How did you get it out?
Sent it to customers.
So existing customers, you already had them.
Yeah.
So let's pretend you don't have customers yet. Who are you going to send a survey to?
I've posted some on LinkedIn before.
You can post them on LinkedIn. Here's the problem with surveys. The problem with surveys is there's a thing called a say-do gap. You want to guess what that means? People say one thing but do something completely different. So for me, surveys aren't the way to solve the problem. You need to interview people. You need to find a way to do something that is synchronous, in person. You have to talk to complete strangers who don't know you. The reason you want to talk to complete strangers is they're not worried about hurting your feelings and telling you the truth. Your friends and your family, and your mom and your dad, right? They'll tell you what you think you want to hear. So what was the program you did last year, Renee? Is there some participants in here?
Discover, validate.
Discovery? Anybody do that program last year?
I did the validate part.
The validate part? The most valuable thing is going out and talking to complete strangers and say, do you have this problem? Yes. Oh, now I need to gather some data. We need to go, okay, how old are you? What are your demographics? We want to try and look for a pattern. Who's got this problem we think we can solve? But without validating the problem and who has it, you don't know who your target market is. And it has to be done in what is called a synchronous format. So in person, over the phone, Skype, or something else. So if you wanted to go talk to these complete strangers who you think might have interest in being your customers, where are you going to find them? Where do they hang out?
Recreation centers.
So what makes you say a recreation center? Who do you think is the people that have interest in your problem or your solution? So you say rec centers, you might be right, but what makes you pick rec centers?
Just a lot of people in one area.
But here's the thing. Are they the people you think have the problem?
Is it your substitutes or your direct competition?
It's possible. You need to figure out where's the biggest audience of people.
Come on.
But for every person, it's going to be different. I'm focused on single moms. I'm focused on first-time moms. Where am I going? Prenatal classes. So I can go to all the recreation facilities I want, but if I want to focus on single moms, I got to go there. Okay? So here's what I want you to spend just a couple of minutes thinking about. If you had to actually go talk to complete strangers, people who you think might have interest in the problem you solve, where would you find them? So take just 30 seconds and just think about where can you find a group of those people so you can actually go talk to them. So take 30 seconds and just think, where would you go to ask questions? Write it down. Where would you go? So that's a little left. Who needs a bio break? So now would be a good time to go take a quick bio break if you want. We'll take a couple of minutes break. Otherwise, my intent's to get out of here somewhere close to 8:45. Okay? Well, my assumption is it was 9 o'clock, but that's okay. I can.
Anytime.
Okay, but, well, 8:45. So if you need to take a bio break, now's a good time to take a bio break. Okay? So is it challenging the way you think? Like, who's going to be my customer? How do I go actually get people to tell me they have this problem? Who has this problem? It's amazing. But who's got the problem? Is it a chief financial officer, a chief operations officer? So a maintenance, so a chief uptime officer, something of that nature. Where are you going to find these guys to say? Because if you find them on LinkedIn, you still got to talk to them. You can't.
I go first. I visited 4 or 5 mines since last year.
Okay,
So
which
I
is
know
good.
a lot of them in person.
But here, I'm going to make an argument and feel free to tell me I'm totally wrong. In your conversations, did you tell them at all what it was that you were selling?
The only thing I've ever sold in a year is major stuff.
Yeah.
Was the customer saying, you know, this is where we really have a problem. And I went out and found the solution and sold them. Right?
And that's the way it works. Because as soon as you leave with a plot service, they're like, oh, I don't need it.
That's why, you know, if I have filtrations in class, if you have problems with, you know, if you guys have best issues, some of those special stuff, let them.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, you were very welcome. Sorry?
Venture Quest is similar to this?
Venture Quest in some respects is kind of sort of similar, but it's just for students on campus. And they submit a video, they come up with an idea for a market service. They submit a video up to 3 minutes long. They take all the videos and get it. They then actually participate in kind of like a showcase for this idea, like a science fair, and they learn how to pitch their idea to students, and they get all kinds of feedback from students. And then they actually have to write a business plan. And when they're finished with the business plan, it gets scored by different judges. And they don't get feedback, they get scored. And then what happens is they all then get a chance to do a 5-year review. So the crazy thing is, on average, only 5 out of 10 ever get to the point where they go and they get it, because they think to themselves, I can't wait my God. It's not about winning, it's about moving things along. Plus, it's also about when you get a chance to talk to 100 people about your business ideas, people have ways to help you. So they totally miss out on the opportunity to go, oh, I'm not going to win, I'm going to get out. One of my own little frustrations, how do I solve that problem and get more students just to, if they write a business plan, they'll pitch. But it's just getting them to write a business plan. I even give them a template, it's 7 pages long. I'll tell them which order to write it, which questions to answer, how long to and I give them a financial analysis template. I have recorded this by doing it for a student. It takes 15 minutes to do the entire 3 years. It just tells you that it's not that idea that it's not part of this is the biggest problem that I have. 2/3 of the people that are in my competition are English as a second language. Right. Average age is 28. 75% of the students. Well, I remember what's right. Yeah, so right now they're comp-based challenge. So that can be in any program on campus. So it's not specific just to. Okay. So I want to get back to this because now you've got a bunch of people you're going to go talk to. You got to talk to a complete stranger. Who's ever talked to a complete stranger for no reason at all? Okay, is it that hard? No. You just have to what? Do it. It's like. So I'm going to tell you a personal story. When Marion left and I was single, and I decided I wanted to save my cash and put it into my business, I moved in with a friend. His name was Kelly. Kelly was a hockey player, and him and his hockey buddies would go out and play hockey on a regular basis, and then Friday nights after they played hockey, they'd go to the bar. And on one occasion, I decided to go with them. And I remember walking into the bar, and I remember seeing this really cute girl over in the corner, ton of personality, having a really good time. And I'm like, I gotta go ask that girl out. But the problem is, believe it or not, I'm actually really shy around women. So I'm like, how can I solve that problem? And all I remember is I asked her a question without asking her out. And my question was, if I asked you out, would you say yes? You can do the same thing when you go approach a complete stranger. Find a way to figure out if there's a question you can ask to at least get the conversation started. And then you want to try and ask of their past buying behavior. This is not a say-do gap. They've done this before. So talk about a problem. What do you use today? How happy are you with what you use? What was it that caused you to leave what you used to do? What was that trigger or event? And this will help you understand not only what are the triggers, but also help you understand what is the competition. So when you go and talk to these people, all you're probing for is, do they have this problem? And if they have this problem, you want to gather some data from them. Whether you want to ask if they're single, not because you want to date them, but just that's your target market. How old are they? What might be their profession? You want to gather some demographic data, so now you can say to yourself, I have realized that first-time moms between the ages of 28 and 40 are my target market. These are the ones that have the problem. How do I go find a whole bunch more just like this? But it's only by asking questions to people that actually fit within your target market and seeing if they actually have the problem you think they have. We're so focused on this shiny solution syndrome that we've got the best, bread slicer on the planet. We don't talk to people to see if they actually want what we have. Do they want it? So what would be some really good questions to ask as part of your problem searching process? In your problem interviews, what might be a really good question to ask a total stranger? And I've done this outside a chapter store as part of a design thinking program. And you're forced to actually go talk to complete strangers and say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur working on an idea. Can I take 2 minutes and ask 3 really quick questions? People will almost always say yes. But what are the 3 questions you're going to want to ask? So what will be a good question you want to start with?
Do you use the product?
So what product?
I can't tell you.
But it's a secret. But what product?
Okay, I'll use my other business.
Okay, but the whole idea is you're probing for a problem.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the first question you're going to ask?
What are you using right now?
So you can ask, what do you use today for your headaches, back pain, whatever it is? Oh, then what do you want to ask them?
Why do you?
How happy are you with that product? But we still haven't probed for the problem.
Have you ever had an inability to deliver your projects on time, on budget?
Could be, but try to pick on one thing. Have you ever
What would
lost
make it better?
Have you ever lost a customer because you didn't deliver on time? Yes. So pick one thing. As soon as you make it 2 things, people get too confused, they can't get there. We need one question to probe for dissatisfaction. So I have a solution. How many here wish they could get more sleep? So hey, have you ever wished you could get more sleep? Yes. Oh, how much do you sleep a night? Oh, about 7 hours. What prevents you from sleeping more? Probe. Here's the secret. You ask for 3 questions. How many do you think you really get? Way more. And one of the things I've learned is you have to ask what is called a second order question. So if anybody watches the news, you see a really good reporter, they're going to ask a question about something. So what's your favorite sport? Hockey. Now, I can go on to my second question, or I can ask a second order question, which is what makes hockey your favorite sport?
I grew up in Edmonton.
And who's your favorite player?
Mark Messi.
Right? So I'm asking second and third order questions to dig a little deeper in the whole process. So you might have 3 questions you want to get answered, but it's really important when you get an answer from your first question, don't go to question number 2. Ask a second order or a third order question. So where do you think you could find moms that would like to go back to work?
The play center.
I think the kids are too young.
Think so?
Yes. They're not in school yet.
Yeah, but maybe they want to escape. They want to go back to work.
It's entirely possible. So I'm going to ask, so personal question, feel free not to answer. How many women in the room have kids? Okay. And how many of you stayed home until your kids went to school? It seems to me that that's a very natural point at which a lot of moms then decide they're going to go back to work because their kids have gone back to school. So where are you going to find a bunch of moms who were thinking they want to go back to work before too long? Preschool, kindergarten class. These are kids are in for half day. Guess where they're going to be next year? Full day. So if I was going to go interview moms around what you've got, I would go find a way to do something related to a school or a kindergarten class. Bus stop. Then you need to document the results. I'm a big fan of Google Forms. Anybody here use Google Apps or so I'm a big fan of Google Forms? All the answers to my surveys go in one place. All my students that we run through this 150 Startups program, they have to do 30 interviews in less than 30 days. They're all documented. And then they look for a pattern within all these people. When I did my first company, I surveyed over 200 senior salespeople and over 200 VPs of sales. Put it all in SurveyMonkey, got it all in a spreadsheet. And I was able to break down certain categories. It wasn't the fact that 38% said this. It just turned out that 38% of VPs or higher that had been in their job for less than 6 months, and it was their first time being a VP of sales, said this. And being able to put it in something like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or Excel allowed me to hyper-focus on the market that I had. How many of you know how to use filters inside Excel? Right? It's a filter. I just want to focus on this, and then here's the results. Let's filter again. And by doing this, I was able to get way more focused on who are the people that I wanted to go spend more time with. Then the next thing is to create what's called an MVP. Anybody heard of what's called an MVP before? Okay, what does an MVP stand for?
Minimum viable product.
And the intent, as far as I'm concerned, with an MVP is the ability to show people what you have. Show them. Don't tell them. Show them. Show them what you have. It can be a prototype. It can be a drawing. It can be almost anything. But the most important thing is somehow you have to find a way to show people what you have. And you want them to understand the impact of your solution. Anybody here in sales? Okay, anybody heard of a guy named Neil Rackham, wrote a book called Spin Selling? So there is if you have 30 minutes to go read 30 pages of a sales book, it's called Spin Selling. It's in chapter 4. It's pages 66 to 95. And what Neil does is he helps people understand not just whether someone has a problem. So S stands for situation, P stands for problem, I stands for implication. And what's interesting is most people think their problem isn't really big. So what's the impact of staying home as a mom longer than you planned?
Less money, career sacrifice.
So what's the impact? There's a huge financial impact. And here's what I can tell you. So let's pretend a mom goes back to work, or a dad goes back to work. Okay, I was a stay-at-home dad for a while. Goes back to work, and they go back to work, let's say when their child is 4, and they have this salary they make, and every year it increases by a certain percentage. But what happens if they don't go back to work until their child is, let's say, 7? What's the impact? It's the salary they would have made in 3 years, plus all the difference between the two curves. So the interesting thing is you need to somehow, if you can, find a way that when you're sharing with people what your MVP is, help them understand the impact of the problem that they have, not just the problem. And that 30 pages is the best 30 pages I've ever read about how do you find a way to help people understand the problem they have is way bigger than they think. As soon as it's bigger than they think, all of a sudden they're now more motivated to change. So you want to build something. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be done really quickly. Okay? In this case, this is a video that Luke made. And this shows the entire thing. How hard was it for him to make that video? It wasn't that hard. He took a camera, put it on the floor, and did this. He could show somebody what his product or service is. And all of a sudden they understand what it's like. The whole idea is you need to do this multiple occasions. So innovation is not a really good idea. Innovation comes from iteration. Testing your idea, seeing what the feedback is like, making it better. Has anybody heard of the term a pivot? So a pivot is basically when you realize the people you thought were the ideal customer, turns out they're not. I'm going to give you an example. I know a couple of guys, she worked for Myers North Penny in Calgary, had a really good idea for a golf book. And let's just say that the golf book was how to break 100. The data says that less than 10% of any golfer ever breaks 100. Less than 10%. Less than 10% of all golfers ever break 100. So they got this book, How to Break 100. They're smart people. Where's the best place to sell a book about how to break 100 in golf? The golf course, right? Makes a lot of sense. So they tried that. Didn't sell any. So they had all this inventory left over at the end of the golf season. They took it to a shopping mall. They had a little cart. And they sold out.
Because people don't want to be seen buying the book.
Who was buying the book?
The wife.
The spouses.
Golf buddies.
Golf buddies. But it turns out more times than not it was the spouse. And for me, the lesson from the story is you need to separate the customer from the user. Who's the customer? How do you figure out between the user and the customer? What does the customer always do?
Customers and your end product, the people that contact me are the family.
Okay? But who's the customer?
The person who gives you
The
money.
person that pays. So what is the service you provide?
I do rehabilitation therapy in homes.
Okay? So I'm going to give you a completely different example. How many of you have aging parents? Okay, over 80. Okay, so my father-in-law was just in county. He's 88 years old. There's lots of people that have aging parents that live in a different geography. So if you sold services, whether it's house cleaning, meals, or anything, for people that had aging parents, who are you selling to?
The children.
Not all of them. One. Which daughter? The oldest daughter. And if it's not the oldest daughter, it's almost always the youngest son. Because the youngest son is the one that left last, sometimes has the best relationship, feels the guiltiest, right? Not in my, I'm the oldest son in my family. I'm the one that spends more time with my mom than everybody else in the family. So I'm an anomaly. But in general, you got to figure out who's the customer, who's the user. And this is a classic example of, oh, I'm selling to children of aging parents. No, you're selling to the oldest daughter or the youngest son.
Which is true because my 2 clients right now, that's what it is. Oldest daughter, youngest son.
Isn't that funny, hey? And as far as I'm concerned, it's not rocket science. You just need to talk to people and ask. Get over your fear of someone telling you, no, I don't have time. So just for me, it's like water off a duck's back. I'm going to go ask the next person. It's just interesting for me that while I have that mentality with a lot of things, when I was younger, I never had that mentality with women. I can't just have them go, no, 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 no. I just, don't ask me why. So creating an MVP. Let's pretend I gave you $5,000. So write this down. I just gave you $5,000 to go build something to show your customers or potential customers what you have. What would you build with that $5,000? I just gave you $5,000. What are you going to do to build an MVP? How are you going to show people what you have so you can then go to people later on after you've done your problem interviews? Because when you're probing for a problem, you're not allowed to talk about your solution. It's not allowed. You're just probing for the problem. I just gave you $5,000. Now you're going to the next stage of interviews because based upon what you were told, you're going to go make something to solve that problem, but you need to show people something. What are you going to do with $5,000? A prototype. So here's the challenge. You don't have $5,000 to build a prototype. You've only got $500. Now what are you going to do?
Build as much as I can.
Draw a picture of it.
So, but write it down. I gave you $500. What are you going to do now?
Be careful. You can't. Create a model.
The problem is you have to do this multiple times over. Do you want to spend $500 every time? I think the answer is no. The first time you do this, you need to say, what can you build for less than $50? How can you build a prototype, an MVP? How can you do something that shows you what you have and do it for less than $50? When we do this 150 Startups Challenge, we tell students, you go interview 30 people, identify the problem, we're going to give you $750. to go build an MVP. What we tell them is that you can spend up to $500 of that running Facebook ads. And they run different Facebook ads to see which ones get the greatest response. The Facebook ads are their MVP. As soon as someone clicks on a Facebook ad, it takes them to a page. Then they ask more information, but we use Facebook ads as part of our MVP. You can run a Facebook ad for less than $50. Because what's happening is people are doing something based upon seeing that Facebook ad. They're going to click, they're acting, they're not saying something, they are doing something. Some other examples of MVPs: brochures, storyboards, explainer videos like you one that Luke actually had. You can make a functional prototype, but the problem is it takes too long, and you probably get it wrong, and you have to iterate multiple times to get it right. And if every time you're doing it, it takes $5,000 and takes 3 months, it's going to take too long to get to the version that you finally want to get to. So who's already got something they use to show people what they have? Who's already got some sort of MVP? Anybody got something they've used? What have you used in the past?
What have I used in the past?
Yeah, like what have you made?
It's called a kneeler.
Okay.
It helps people.
But what was your MVP? How did you show people or tell people what it is that you have without having to spend $100,000 on tooling to actually make one?
I made one.
You spent $100,000.
No, I didn't. I made it myself.
Oh, you made it out of what?
Wood.
Okay, so that's a really good example. How much does it cost to make a prototype out of wood?
The first one, nothing.
Nothing, right? If you're my father-in-law, you go to the junkyard, you find the wood at the dump, and you take it back and you make one. So that's a really good example of making something really cheap to get some feedback before you try and find a way to go make something else. Does anybody know the Zappos story?
Yes.
So what's the Zappos story?
Wanted to sell shoes.
He wanted to sell shoes. How did he get started?
Started actually as like a lemonade stand when he was a kid, or buttons, making buttons.
But how did he start his shoe store?
It was online.
It was online. You know what he did? He started this, because he had a theory that shoes would sell online. People said he was crazy and stupid. No one's going to buy shoes online. They'll return them all the time. And he decided he was going to prove them wrong. So he put up something on a website. Then he walked across the road to the shoe store across the road, took pictures of the shoes, put them up on the website, and when someone ordered the shoes, what did he do? He walked across the street, he bought the shoes and shipped them, and he proved, without having to buy a bunch of inventory, he actually proved the entire thing and spent almost nothing doing it. That for me is a really good example of how you can prove customers actually want what you have. You put it up and someone buys it. If they don't buy it, you change it. Okay? Here for me is when we talked, and I think I picked on pretty much everybody evenly, you can't describe the value of being your customer. Most of you sucked because you described the product or service that you sold. When you describe a product or service, you're using nouns. When you describe the value, you're using verbs. And the secret is you don't tell people what you want to say, you tell people what they want to hear. So I met a lady once who taught kids music, and she focused on teenagers. And I was like, why do you teach teenagers music? Because what I've learned, and she did this on Aboriginal reserves, that when kids learn music, they make better decisions. So her value proposition is I'll teach your kids to make better life decisions. When you can describe the value of being your customer without mentioning the product or service, and the other person says, how do you do that? That is a value proposition. Everything else is just a pitch. So it's what I often call a 7-second sale. I would argue I can create interest in anybody's product in this room, and I could say it in less than 7 seconds, and somebody would ask me the question, how do you do that? So this is your challenge. Seth Godin says if you can't describe what you do in 8 words or less, you don't know what you do. Let me give you some examples. One of my favorite examples is actually a company in Calgary. They make cables that go inside grain exchanges. They measure moisture and temperature. And they tell you when the grain is going bad or getting too dry. And that's what they use to sell. But what they realized is, in doing their problem interviews, they realized that their real customer was the chief financial officer of a grain exchange, and that their biggest problem was, as soon as they took over the job, there was all these inventory write-downs, all this stuff they now couldn't sell. And that then became their value proposition. We help CFOs eliminate inventory write-downs. If you were a CFO, what question would you ask? How? One of my favorite videos, if I had time to show it, is anybody seen the Kevin guy who won America's Got Talent a long time ago? What was his name? Forgotten his name, but he plays this guitar. And the reason that I was really intrigued by what he did was that here was this amateur guitarist who had the audience completely silenced in his presentation or in his playing. And the reason I found it interesting was the day before in this class I used to teach for first-time entrepreneurs, the self-employment learning, I had a guy show up who told me he taught men how to play guitar. And I'm like, well, why do guys take guitar lessons? And he said, because they want to learn to play the guitar. Why do guys play guitar?
Women.
To get the girl, right? That's the reason. So now, in my case, I'm a little different. I'm already married, and I wanted to play guitar because I wanted to be able to play guitar with my son around the campfire one day. He's a rock star. I'm 5 years in. I can't play 4 chords together 3 times in a row. I suck. Okay? But you need to figure out what's the value of being your customer. Why would somebody actually buy it? Create interest in what you do by using verbs and get them to ask the question, how? So what are some of the questions you could ask somebody, especially around your product or service? Because you now have multiple options. You've made a prototype or an MVP. Now you have to get people to decide. What might be some of the questions you would ask somebody now before you go away instead of spending $50 on an MVP and spending $500? What questions might you ask? How much are you willing to pay? I totally agree with this. The dilemma is, if I was to say, are you willing to pay $50, you're going to say what?
Sure.
Yes or no, which might be a lie. And the question is, you have no idea how much money people are actually willing to pay for something. What I figured out is you can ask a 1 to 10 question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to spend $50 on this? And if he gives me a 7, what have I just figured out?
You're in the range. You could go higher.
He's ready to pay how much?
$35.
How did you get $35?
No math stuff.
Do you know math stuff? 7 out of 10, $50 is $35. Because I think that is one of the things you have to figure out. I know math stuff. Wow. And he's a comedian to boot. So this is one of the questions you need to figure out. How much is someone willing to actually pay for your product or service? And if you ask them the direct question, odds are you're not going to get the answer that you need. So I like to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to spend $100 to buy something like this? A 5. Now I know someone's only willing to spend $50. The next piece is if it's viable. Viable is you know you can make it. Now you need to know if you can make money at it. So I know there's a spreadsheet, Jason, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
How long does that spreadsheet take to fill in?
Depends if you have your information or not, but not very long.
Okay, so I'm a big believer that before you actually write your business plan, you should actually do your financials. And here's the reason why I say that. I learned this by the stuff I do with Goldman Sachs and Babson College and the 10,000 Small Businesses program. They don't say, what do you have and what can you do with what you have? What they say is, where would you like to go? Now, how are you going to get there? So for me, I like to do the financials first. This is what I want to do. Then when I write my business plan tells me how I'm actually going to get there. There's a presentation I do as part of a lot of things around pitch competitions or stuff with students, entrepreneurship. It's called the 10 steps of turning an idea into a business. So I got 1 to 10. Where do you think write a business plan is in the 1 to 10?
At the end.
It's number 9. For me, one of the first things I think you should do is you should do your financials. How much money do I want to make? Can I actually get there? Because if you can't make money at this, you need to go find something else to do. Okay? So I came when I started this entire presentation with the intent of people doing something differently. Jumping, one thing. Here's what I want everybody in the room to do. I want you to pair up with somebody who you didn't come with. Okay? So go find somebody else in the room, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell that other person what's the one thing you're going to do differently based upon the time we just spent here tonight. So go find somebody you don't already know, and go figure out what's the one thing you're going to do differently based upon what you learned tonight. Okay? Go. Let's spend a couple of minutes. Go find somebody new. What are you going to tell them? What are you going to do differently? So if only one of you is gone, make sure you switch. Right now's the time to switch. Make sure you both make that commitment. One thing you're going to do differently. If you can hear me now, clap once. If you can hear me now, clap twice. If you can hear me now, clap 3 times. If you want something in life, what do you have to do? You have to ask. I have a 12-year-old son. His name is Liam. I've taught him this. There used to be a liquor store around the corner from my house. And he got to know all the people that worked there on a first-name basis. And it's not that we went there that often, it's just kind of
Yeah.
my second. So he would go to this liquor store all the time and he would ask for stuff. He'd go, hey Tyler, do you have anything for little boys? He came home with work gloves, golf balls, t-shirts, baseball hats. On one occasion it was a really nice red baseball hat. It was Christmas time, it was the World Juniors. My wife made a passing comment about liking the hat. The next time we went to the liquor store, what do you think he did? Yeah, can I have another hat? This one's for my mom. So I've learned that if you want things in life, you have to ask. And I think you can ask complete strangers for help by doing these problem and customer interviews. All you have to tell them is you are a what? I'm an entrepreneur. People are like, wow, how can I help? But here's the thing, if you want something, you have to ask. I actually haven't asked for everybody in this room. In fact, I'm going to ask everybody in this room for two things. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to ask you to hold the other person accountable for the promise they just made to you. But here's more important. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to hold yourself accountable for the promise you just made to the other person. And I just want to share with you one resource that's online. I'm a big believer in pitching, and when you get to the point where you want to pitch, I've been doing this presentation for quite a while called Nailing Your Pitch on the First Try. On this website we run for students, under 150 startups. In the resources section, if you fill in this form, it will actually email you back the recording, and if I'm not mistaken, even the slides from the presentation. So when you get to the point where you get to pitch, this is the best resource that I've got. Okay? And if you want some help, all you have to do is what? Ask. I'm in Calgary. I generally book 3 or 4 weeks in advance, so if you want some help, call or text me. My email is okay, but I'm a way better texter and a talker than I am a typer. If you want some help, phone me up. We'll find some time. We'll go for coffee. If you want to come in pairs, right, come with somebody else. It's always a good idea to get another person's opinion around what you do. And that's what I came to talk about. The good news is I don't have to drive all the way back to Calgary tonight, so if people have questions and they want to ask them before they leave tonight, I will hang around. What time is it now? 8:45? Yeah. I can hang around till about 9:30, answering any questions that people have. And then that, I'm going to hand it back to Jason. Thank you.
I don't just say this, and this is one of my favorite presentations every year, because Craig hits a lot of points. We actually talked about it a little bit at the break. He hits a lot of the points that we talk about through the CEC itself. And one of the recurring themes that you're going to see this year that was done through Discovery and Validation, through TechConnect as well, is actually talking to your customers. I cannot tell you, I've had business plans come across my desk and they say, I want $250,000 for this new business idea that's never been done in Lethbridge. And I say, great, how many people have you talked to? And they go, oh, none. But I want $250,000. And they've done so much work to that point without ever actually talking to somebody. And once you get into sales and once you get into pitching, that is so natural to entrepreneurs after you get used to it. And you guys live in Canada. We're routinely made fun of for being one of the most polite countries in the world. Nobody's going to get mad at you for asking them a question or if you can have some of their time. And if they do, you didn't want the response anyways, they're probably not your target market. He hits a lot of really good points in his presentation as well. One of my patented pet peeves I'm going to tell you about right now is when you say you don't have competition in your business plan. I have seen hundreds of business plans. So many say we don't really have competition, and you do. That is a huge red flag. Anyone screening your business plan, looking at it for financing, if you say that, that is a red flag to that lender because it shows that you haven't really done your due diligence in that. In terms of the pitching, that is such an important part of the business, and Craig knows it. And so, like he said, he's probably one of the best presenters that we have, even though he's from Calgary, and actually lending in lending his ear and his expertise, and we're very thankful to have him as a part of the competition. In terms of next week, we're going to be talking about the first kind of tools that we're going to give you in terms of that business building. We're going to have Renee and Miki here from TechConnect. They're going to be talking about the value proposition canvas, which is at its core, that 7-second sale that Craig talked about, that's the value proposition. And that's one of the first and most important aspects of your business. And then we're going to talk about market research because, again, that's a very critical component. So if any of you have any questions, I have my contact information up here, my direct line and email address, and we have Stuart's information on there as well. Do not hesitate to reach out and ask us any questions. And with that, we'll let you guys go for the night.